Hello, my name is Brent Weeks. I am the author of the Night Angel trilogy and the Lightbringer series. This is the Q&R for June. And hi from the past. If you're watching this after June 6th, I will have turned in my copy edits for the Burning White. But in my timeline, I just got them this morning, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm a little distracted. Oh, by the way, I keep getting asked, Q&R is question and response because so often I don't actually answer your questions, for which my apologies. And in that vein, one more sidebar first. I never know where you're from or what your descent is when I read these questions. So if I butcher your name, it might just be pure ignorance, or it might be like I don't know whether to try to give that a French pronunciation or just do Bayou French, which almost gets me off on another tangent. So you'll just have to forgive me when I butcher your name, not if, but when. So starting on this, here's one that I probably won't mess up. M. Scott Havner says, did the Ioun Stones of D&D have any influence on the formative process for the kakari? And the answer to that is no. Actually, I played very little D&D when I was a kid. My parents, like a lot of parents at that point, were not big fans of D&D. So we played it on the sly until we got caught, and then they took it away. And so it was always the forbidden fruit for me. So the Ioun Stones, I actually had never encountered those in D&D by the time that I became an adult and was making up the kakari and how those would work. Sean Stevenson, so just to continue my answering, not answering kind of theme today, Sean Stevenson says, so we have the universe of the Night Angel and the Lightbringer. Are these worlds related, centuries apart, or different worlds entirely? If so, is there any chance for some sort of crossover? Maybe like drafters are just called meisters, or talents centuries past? And the answer to that is, as Robert Jordan so eloquently put it many years ago, is read and find out. RAFO, to the delight and chagrin of all of his fans. Yeah, I'm not going to answer that one. Sorry. And generally, things that are plot related, things that are ongoing, I don't like to answer. I like to leave that in your court. I like you guys to discover things for yourselves. I feel like once I write the book, what's in the book is my part, and then how you interpret it, what you find in it, that's kind of up to you. That's your game, and I hope not to change my mind and wade into things too much, even though sometimes the temptation is strong. Finally, a question I'll answer. Krista Evans says, how do you juggle home life, such as making sure you spend enough time with your wife and kids, with writing as well? This has been something I've struggled with. I just cannot get into the groove of sitting down and writing, even though it nags at me. And apparently, Gore Desai Ackerman also asked a very similar question. Well, the thing is, non-writers don't feel guilty about not writing. So if you feel guilty, if writing is nagging at you, then it's something you have to do. And unfortunately, there's not an easy answer for most of us, and doubly so for people, maybe triply so for moms with small children. Spending time with your family is probably more important, and I think it's really, really important to not become a terrible person while trying to pursue this career, but it's hard. I've had writing. I had a writing teacher who said, he suggested bringing a dry erase marker in the pen. In the car, and he said, write on your window when you're stopped at lights. He was in LA, so probably spent a lot more time stopped than most of us during his commute. But anything you have to do, if I do strongly recommend, rather than saving up for a weekend or hey, I'll have a writing retreat once a year, I suggest, and again, this is just my 2 cents, but I suggest doing a little bit every day, because that keeps your brain engaged with it, and that keeps your mind working on it even when you're not working on it. So sometimes if you only have half an hour to write at the end of the day, after the kids are in bed, um, instead of sitting down to watch your favorite show, sometimes that half hour will be incredibly productive, and it's actually a rude wake up call for a lot of writers who they get started on their career. They think, man, I was writing 2 pages a day in just a half an hour. Like, boy, if I have 8 hours a day, surely I'll just be writing 30 pages a day. It'll be awesome. And then they get out and they're writing 3 pages a day, and it's kind of devastating to them because they're spending so much time and yet getting only marginally more words per day. And that, I think, is because your subconscious keeps working on the writing problems. You think about like things that you overhear. You think, oh, that's really funny, like the way she put that. I love that little verbal quirk that she has. Or oh, the way that guy said that just fries me inside. I just want to hurt somebody who does that. And then that gets incorporated into your writing. Where if you're sitting staring at a screen all day, all you're incorporating into your writing is Twitter, and that's garbage. So don't do that. But you're not having the life experience. You're not having the other stuff that your fiction feeds on. So I suggest keeping it alive in your head, however you can, and then experiment. What works for me is going to be different than what works for you, unfortunately. And people who tell you this is the way to get a thing done, they're usually selling you something. And as you see, hey, no ads on my YouTube or Facebook, so at least not for me. So I'm not selling anything yet. Okay, onward and upward. Ellie the Cat, with great spelling there from YouTube, says, just how are you able to write several books with so many characters that not become jumbled or feel like each other? They all feel like their own unique and very interesting character. Often in books, some characters are hard to separate because they look, talk, behave very similarly. But you've done something very unique, and that is creating characters that are all interesting to follow and to know more about. There's a couple answers to this, but the main one that's infuriating and not helpful is just a lot of hard work. When I finish a book, because it's me speaking all the lines. Like think of your favorite actors, and like they might have great range. They might do really different characters, but some actors are amazing and they only do a certain number of characters really well. And that doesn't make them terrible actors. It just means they have a fastball. They have something that they're awesome at. And when, sorry for not silencing my, gosh, how awkward. As a writer, I have a certain voice. I have a certain sense of humor. I have ways that I do things naturally. There's things I do really well, really easily. And my assistant is interrupting the video. How rude, how awful. I can't believe this. Does anybody know where I can find a new assistant? I gotta throw something at her, but this is my own house. Oh, she's angry now. Shoot, she gets to edit this video. Anyway, it's always me, and so that's kind of a bummer. Sorry to pull back the curtain and tell you how things actually work, but it's always you, and so to differentiate your voice, mostly you work at it and you go look, this is how this character talks, and like after you write the book, you go back and you go, you know what, these two characters sound really similar to each other. And you spend the time to be like, okay, who is this character? Where are they from? How do they think about things? What kind of vocabulary do they use? What kind of grammar do they use? And then you go through, like I'll have whole rewrites, if you want to call them that, where I'll just look at a certain character's dialogue, and I'll look at every line of their dialogue through the entire book, and I'll spend the time differentiating it from the other characters. I'll make sure it's true to themselves. And maybe sometimes you have to cheat around the edges, like you've got a character who's very laconic and kind of speaks in very, Durzo speaking in very brief phrases that distill a lot. Well, sometimes you need him to monologue, right? Okay, well, fine. Cheat when you have to, when that monologue is really necessary. But otherwise, try to keep the characters really true to themselves and really distinct. You can help this though. So to get to the slightly more helpful part of the techniques I use is make sure that your characters start out as really different from each other. If they have different social backgrounds, if they have different ethnicities, if they're rich, if they're poor, if they're educated, if they're not educated, if they've got an accent, if you're able to do accents. If you can't write accents, don't go too far outside your strengths. Generally, people who have an ear for that or they don't. And if you don't have an ear for it, you can work on that part of your game, get it better, but don't have 30 different characters with accents. You're just going to crash and burn. So you think of all these things, and you think of how their world impacts them, both as they grew up and who they are, and then you got to fit it to where they're at. If they're in front of the king, are they going to use different vocabulary there? Are they going to get tripped up? And you just try to make it be consistent. So starting with characters who are really different from each other is also, it's something that I learned from, 20 years ago now or more, learned from George Martin. It's like he uses what Faulkner called grotesques. And these are characters who are, they're almost caricatures. They start as super different from each other. So the guy isn't ugly. He literally has no nose. The guy isn't really big. He is the largest man you've seen in your life. He's 7.5 feet tall. He's got rippling muscles, and half of his face is burnt off. She's not just the plain girl. She's the horse-faced girl, et cetera, et cetera. When you start them as really distinct, like, which girl out of 40? The horse-faced girl. Brutal description, but it helps readers place it instantly in their heads. Where, like, if you have 50 guys lined up, they're all wearing the same kind of armor, they all have brown hair and brown eyes, they're all holding swords, they all, grew up educated, like, differentiating a bunch of those guys is impossible. It's just so hard. You're making things really difficult for yourself. So try not to do that. My gosh, now phones are ringing. It's like I do this from my house. How unprofessional can you get? Anyway, so that's my basic suggestion, and we're gonna call that it while my answering machine goes off in the background and all hope of looking polished is just gone. I'll talk to you next month. Thanks. Bye.